that the best course of action in the face of oppression and inequality is overthrowing the powers that be. However, this instant jump to conflict overlooks the value of compromise in dealing with serious obstacles. This is especially evident in the case of the French Revolution, where good intentions and attempts at compromise led to a brutal, destabilizing conflict that killed hundreds of thousands of people. Heavily influenced by enlightened thinking and inspired by the American Revolution, the French people began to question the arbitrary nature of the way their society functioned, also known as the Ancien regime. The Ancien regime is a term for the way of being before the French Revolution. It was characterized by the deep chasm between the elegance of the upper class and the unjust poverty of the common people. The debt from France's involvement in recent wars, along with the debt accumulated from the previous reign, put the country in serious financial trouble, and King Louis XVI was nowhere near capable of dealing with the task. He was more interested in pleasing the upper class than implementing effective reform, and the lower classes paid the price. They paid half their income in dues to nobles, tithes to the Catholic Church, and taxes to the king's agents. To prevent conflict and satisfy the majority of people, he called for the Estates General to meet. Last called 175 years prior, the Estates General was a congress, representative of the three estates of French society. 97% of people were members of the Third Estate. As a member of the Third Estate, your opportunities were severely limited based solely on your bloodline. Not only were they less valued as human beings, but they also had to pay the brunt of taxes.
From the very beginning, it was clear that some estates were more important than others. The system in which the committee was to vote was inherently biased towards the upper class. Each estate had one vote, meaning that even though the Third Estate had almost the same number of delegates as the other two combined, the First Estate could always override their decisions. This was unacceptable to the delegates of the Third Estate, many of which were well-educated and wealthy. Influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment period, it seemed to many of them that there was no reason that the groups should be separated, when there was little to no qualitative differences between the two. More issues arose as they began to discuss the problems at hand. They couldn't agree on whether each estate should discuss issues separately or work as one group, the second and most of the first preferring the former. Despite the others' unwillingness to cooperate, the Third Estate called their own meeting and invited the others to join them. Their attempt at compromise failed, leading the Third Estate to make radical decision to create the National Assembly, a parliament representative of the people and not each estate. King Louis, not blind to the actions of his subjects, sought to inhibit the progress of such a radical group. On June 20th, when the assembly arrived in their normal meeting place, they found it locked. Angered but not dissuaded, the group met in an indoor tennis court and made the fateful decision not to leave until they had a constitution, an event that would eventually become known as the Tennis Court Oath. Several small conflicts later, Louis and his counterparts begrudgingly compromised, beginning the process of becoming a constitutional monarch. While educated leaders were trying to implement governmental change, underpaid factory workers, known as sans-culottes, and rural peasants were fighting to survive. The winter of 1789 had taken its toll on the production of wheat, causing the price of bread to skyrocket and leaving the everyday citizens desperate and hungry. On top of this, the recent calling of the Estates General had amassed troops, many of which weren't even French, around Paris, putting many of the starving underclass on edge. However, the straw that broke the camel's back was Louis's termination of Jacques Necker, a popular figure and financial advisor. 3 days after his dismissal, on the 14th of July, a mob of peasants, in an attempt to protect themselves, raided the Hôtel des Invalides, liberating 3,000 guns and 5 cannons. Without gunpowder, however, the weapons were useless. To solve their problem, the mob decided to raid the Bastille, a medieval prison, in order to get the gunpowder kept inside. Although impressive, the fort was more of a symbol of royal oppression than any actual prison, only housing 7 prisoners on the day of the riot. When the prison governor refused to give the mob the gunpowder they wanted, the people took it by force. In the course of a few hours, almost 100 civilians and 8 guards were killed. The governor's head, along with the heads of several other guards, were paraded around on pikes by the mob. This event, known as the storming of the Bastille, is considered the end of the Ancien regime and set a precedent for the mob violence that characterized the rest of the revolution.
In an effort to deal with the problems more civilly, the moderates of the National Assembly put out a document called the Declaration of the Rights of Man. This document laid out the essential rights of all men: equality, freedom of speech, religion, and the press, the right to take part in government, the right to hold public office, and the right to a fair trial. These rights helped coin the phrase that would be used throughout the rest of the revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. This was the official end of the feudal system in France, freeing peasants from their duties, removing nobles from their source of power, and seizing church property. Although the National Assembly was working towards a better life for the common people in France, many were still starving. In contrast to the immense suffering of his people, however, Louis and his wife, Marie Antoinette, were living 12 miles away in the Palace of Versailles. This 2,000-acre estate, brimming with lush gardens and 50 fountains, took up to 25% of France's income just to maintain. Understandably, this upset many of the lower class, mainly because of the distance between Versailles and Paris. In early October of 1789, a group of peasants, most of which were women, decided to walk the 12 miles on foot to drag the royal family back to Paris. From then on, the king and queen resided in the Tuileries Palace in Paris. This event would come to be known as the Women's March and became the unofficial end of the monarchy as it had been before. From then on, the royal family were virtually prisoners in their own palace. Although Louis and his family were still well attended to, they were confined to the Tuileries. While there, they were subjected to the attention of the radical lower class, and events like the Day of Daggers, a standoff between noblemen and sans-culottes at the palace, were more than enough to make the royal family feel unsafe. Finally, having enough of their constant harassment and humiliation, the royal family fled Paris. Between June the 20th and 21st of 1791, the royal family attempted to abscond to the neighboring country of Austria to meet up with Marie's family. However, before they could reach the border, they were caught, recognized in the small town of Varennes. From that moment on, they lost the support of the people. In the eyes of the Third Estate, it was betrayal of the worst kind. This event, known as the Flight to Varennes, opened the door for their execution 1 year later. 2 years later, as a result of this and several other transgressions, King Louis was guillotined. This sparked the period of intense violence and intolerance called the Reign of Terror, characterized by escalating radicalism and political expediency through murder. During this, the people, spurred on by the revolution, were responsible for the deaths of 250,000 so-called counter-revolutionaries. They even went as far as to expel their opposing political parties to further their misguided goal. The general attitude behind their efforts was best stated by Bertrand Barré, committed Jacobin and member of the Committee of Public Safety. He said, "Terror is the order of the day. This is how to do away instantly with both royalists and moderates and the restless, counter-revolutionary scum. The royalists want blood, well, they shall have the blood of conspirators, the likes of Brizot and Marie Antoinette. It will be an operation for the special revolutionary tribunals." This only came to an end with the execution of Robespierre. In the aftermath of the horror, a weak government formed called the Directory. Despite their attempts to reform, they were overthrown by Napoleon several years later, officially ending the First French Revolution. The revolution was born out of good intentions to serve its people and give everyone a chance to live their lives. This goal was apparent towards the beginning. The tennis court oath sparked change and compromise that seemed to promise a better future. But the last acts of this revolution cast a shadow on the first. The lack of compromise and tolerance for different ideas ultimately doomed this movement and was why it was unsuccessful. It goes to show how through compromise anything seems achievable, and as soon as the compromise stops, so does effective change.